enter on to import it. And then I'm going to give this a value to begin with of true. So to begin with, we will show the login form. Now I need to return that at the bottom, like so. Okay, so now we've done that, we can use it up here, and I want to evaluate that. So I'm going to create a div first of all, and I'm going to apply viv to that. And I'm going to set it equal to show login. So I'm only going to show this div if this is true. Now inside that, I can now nest the login form. And I'll do an h2 above that. So h2, and we'll say login. And now I need to do an else clause at the bottom, so another div, and then I will say velse. And inside here, we can now place the sign up form, like so. And I'll do an h2 above that says sign up. Okay, so now we're only going to be seeing one form at a time. If this value is true, we show the login form. If it's false, we show the sign up form. So to begin with, we should see the login form. Now we need a way to toggle this and allow the user to toggle it from the web page. So what I'm going to do is a paragraph tag below the login form here. Let me create this p tag first. And inside that, I'm going to say no account yet. And then I'm going to do a span tag. And inside that span, I will say sign up. And then close the span tag. And then just put instead at the end. Now this span tag, I'm going to attach a click event to. And I'm going to set that equal to something. Now I'm not going to create a function for this because it's very simple logic. All I want to do here is when they click on this span, show this sign up form instead. So I need to toggle this from true to false. So I'll say show login is equal to false. And then if this is false, it's not going to show this anymore, and instead it will show this. So if I save this, we can see if I click on sign up, it shows sign up instead. And we need to do something similar on the sign up page. So let me duplicate this and paste it below here. And then instead of no account yet, I'll say already registered question mark. And then this should be login instead. And this time we want to change it to true. So now if I click on login instead, it goes back to login. Sign up, login. So this all works, but it doesn't look like a user can click on this sign up thing. So we need to just style it a little bit differently. Let me come to the bottom down here and just paste in a couple of styles. So the span tag inside welcome, which is this and this. We say the font weight is bold, underline, and the cursor is pointer. And also the button right here, I'm giving that a bit of margin as well. So 20 pixels top and bottom, auto left and right. I'm going to save this. And now this looks more like a link that we can click. And when we do that, it toggles between the two different forms. Okay then, so we're at the point now where we have the login and the sign up form, and we want to implement some kind of authentication flow whereby users can sign up and log in to our application. Now to do that, we'll be using Firebase authentication. And much like in our Firebase config, we've imported Firebase Firestore, we can do a similar thing for Firebase authentication. And then what that does is allow us to use methods that we can use to sign up, log in and log out users. Now, when we use these methods to authenticate users, to log them in or sign them up, Firebase automatically on the server generates a user token to identify that user. And then this is then passed back to the browser along with user information like their unique user ID, their email, and their display name. And we can access all of that information from our JavaScript code in our Vue components, for example. And we could do something with it like display their name on the screen when they're logged in. Now, the token is then also used by Firebase for any subsequent requests to Firebase services, such as a request to the database to get some data. Now, Firebase can then verify the user to make sure they're logged in on the back end using this token, and we can use this to do things like restrict access to unauthenticated users to our services like the Firestore database, so that maybe only logged in people can access the data. So we'll see exactly how to do all of that later on, but just keep this picture of Firebase authentication in your mind. Firebase passing a token and user information back and forth between the front end in the browser and the back end on the Firebase server. Now, we don't need to worry too much about Firebase does all of this under the hood. We can just focus on using the authentication properties and methods Firebase provides us with to authenticate users and get user information. Alright then, so the first step in all of this is to head on over to our Firebase backend, go to authentication, because we need to set up a sign-in method. So click on this button. Now there's loads of different sign-in methods that we can use. You can allow people to sign in with Google on your website, or Facebook, or Twitter, or GitHub, or any of these. We're going to stick with email and password. So click on this over here to enable it, because everything is disabled by default. Then save. You don't need to enable this at the bottom. Save this, and now we can see this method is enabled. So now we can use email and password to sign into our application. So now what we need to do is head on over to the Firebase config and import the Firebase auth package, and also initialize Firebase auth, much like we did the firestore as well. So let me import Firebase /auth. That's what we need to import to use the service. And then down here, I'm going to initialize the authentication service by saying const, and then I'll call this project auth, set that equal to firebase.auth, and that is a function. And now whenever we use authentication services to either log a user in, sign them up, or sign them out, then we're going to use this thing right here. So let's also export this at the bottom, project auth, like so that we can use it in Vue components in the future. Okay then, so now we've got Firebase authentication set up so we can use it in our application by using this thing right here, project auth. Let's try using it. Now, what I'm going to do is begin by making a composable function, and then we can use that inside the sign up form. So I'm externalizing all the logic inside another function. Now let's create a new folder called composables to create all of our composable functions in, and inside that I'm going to create one called use signup.js. Oops, I need to correctly add on JS at the end. Okay, so inside here, the first thing I'm going to do is create a function. So I'm going to call this signup, like so, and set that equal to an async function. Now, I'm not actually calling it use signup because this is not the use signup function. I'm also going to create a use signup function. I'll explain this in a second. And this is the function that will be exported at the end of the file. So down here we'll export default use signup. So why am I doing this? Well, this thing right here, this is the function that we're actually going to use to sign people up, but it doesn't need to be declared inside this use signup function right here. All we need to do inside here is return some values. So for example, we might have an error if there's an error, and the signup function. So when we use this function from another component somewhere, then we get these values back. So for example, if I was to come over here to the signup form, I would first of all import use signup from, and then we come up a level, go into composables, and then we need use signup. So if I was to use this inside the setup function over here, I would say const error and signup is equal to use signup, because these are the values that we return from this function. Does that make sense? We're returning these values. So that's the job of this function, to return the values. Now, there's no need to place the signup function inside this function so that every time we use this and invoke this function inside a Vue component, then we're creating another version of the signup function. There's absolutely no need to do that. So it doesn't need to be inside this function. All right. So inside this function now, we can declare this as async, and then we can use await to try and sign the user in. Now, before we do anything, I'm going to create an error value. And again, this doesn't need to be inside here. We don't need to say const error is equal to ref. Let me just import that by clicking on it. It should import it at the top. And then to begin with, it's going to be null. We don't need to declare this value inside use signup itself, because if we're using this signup composable right here, we don't need a new error every time we're doing it. I'm guessing in our application, we're not going to be using it twice at the same time, whereby we might have different errors. So we don't need to create a new error object or a new error reference every time we invoke this. We can just create it once inside this file and then update it and return it where we need it. So I'm going to take that outside of the function, and then inside this use signup, just return the values. And then I can create this ref at the top. Okay, so now we have this ref and we have this signup function. Let's flesh out this signup function first of all. Now what I'm going to do is take in some parameters, some arguments. The first one is going to be the email. The second one is going to be the password. And the third one will be the display name. Now remember, these are all the things that we enter in on the signup field, and we capture all of those and store them right here. So when we call the signup function, we'll pass in each of these values as well as arguments. Okay, so now we have those. The first thing I'm going to do is set the error.value equal to null. And the reason I'm doing that is because if there is an error, say they've tried to sign up once and there's an error and we have a value for that now because the sign up failed, maybe they entered a password that wasn't long enough, that will have a value, right? So then maybe they'll change that value in the form. If we go to sign up again, I want to reset that error value until we get a response. So we're not constantly showing that error value to the user. So that's the first thing I'm doing. The second thing I'm going to do is create a try and catch block. And remember, the catch block takes in the error object, if there is one. Now inside the try block, I want to try and use the project auth service. So let me say, first of all, await project auth. And we need to import this, remember. So import, we want project auth, and that comes from, we come up a level and then go into the firebase folder, and then we want the config file. So we have this. Now we can use a method on this called create user, and this is a long method. A lot of firebase auth methods are long. So create user with email and password, and we need to pass into this an email value and a password. But remember, we get those values right here when we call sign up. So we can pass in email and password like so. So this method right here is given to us by Firebase Auth, and we use it on this project auth object. So this goes out and it tries to take this email and password and sign that user up. So it makes a request to the Firebase backend. It signs that user up. If everything is okay, then it does that. It signs that user up and it sends us back a response. So I'm going to store that. So const response is equal to this. Now, if we don't get a response, or if the response is null, then it means we can't complete the sign up for whatever reason. So I'm just going to make sure that we have a response by saying if not response. So if we don't get one, we'll throw an error. So throw new error, and this error is just going to say could not complete the sign up. All right. So we're throwing this error if there's not a valid response. Now this thing right here signs the user up, and if it's successful, when it comes back, there is a user property attached to this response, and we can do something with that. But for now, how about we just log that user to the console? So I'm going to say console.log, and we'll log out response.user. Okay, so now what I'd like to do is, first of all, if we have an error, we'll console.log that error. We'll say error.message, like so, and also update the error ref up there. So error.value is equal to the error message as well. So now on the sign up form, when we run this function, handle submit, I want to call this sign up function. So let's get rid of this, and instead I'm going to change this to an async function, because we can then await sign up, because remember the sign up method right here is asynchronous as well, and we want to wait for that to finish. So we can await it, and we pass in the email value, so email.value. That's what a user types into the field. It's this ref right here, and also the password value. And remember, we passed in the display name as well. We're not using that yet inside this function, but we passed it in, so let's do it. We'll say display name.value. Okay, so I'm going to now save this and come over here, and if I refresh, then go to sign up, I'm going to inspect and open up the console so we can see the response. Display name, I'll just say testing. Email, I'm going to call this one yoshi@google.com, and then test1234 for the password. And in fact, we'll change the display name to Yoshi as well. Sign up, it's going to try and sign up, and then see we get this response object right here. So on this object, there's loads of different things. The display name is currently null because we don't set that when we first sign the user up. We'll do that in a second. But now we can see the email, and we can also see down here the UID. So that's a unique identifier for that user. So all of this information about the user has been logged to the console. And remember, all of that was attached to the response object right here that we're logging to the console. So now we've signed the user up, and Firebase will have created this record for that user on our Firebase backend. And if we go over here and go to users at the top over here, we can see now we have this user. We see the unique ID, we see when they were created, when they last signed in, and their email. Now, this right here, this signed in is today's date, the same day as created. Now, when you sign up to Firebase, like we just did using this method, Firebase automatically logs you into the application to begin with. So we're seen as logged in as well. Okay, so what I also want to do is once we've signed up, I want to update the user's display name, because if we take a look in the console and scroll down to display name, it's currently null. And this is correct. When we first tried to sign a user up using this method, create user with email and password, we only pass in the email and the password. Now, if we want to set the display name, we need then to use a method called update profile on the user. So what I'm going to do is call that method down here. I'm going to await, then the response object, then the user, which we get back, we just saw that, then a method which we can use called update profile. And in here, we pass in an object, and we can update whatever property on the user we want. Now, it's not just any property that we make up. For example, I can't make up a property called fave color and then set it to something. It doesn't work like that. There's only a certain amount of properties we can use that Firebase dictates, and one of those is display name. So let's pass in the display name like so. And remember, we're passing in this value right here. So now it's going to update the user after they've signed up and set their display name. Now, at the end of all this, I want to return this response object. So if we call this sign up function, then we can return this response object, and if we need it for anything later on, we can use it. So let's do that below here. I'm going to return response, and also I'm going to set the error to be null as well. So I'll say error.value equals null. And again, the reason I'm doing that is because if we tried to sign up once and there was an error, if something was wrong, and this was no longer null because we updated the error down here, at that point, this has a value. If we try to sign up again and it works, then there shouldn't be an error. We shouldn't then show an error to the user on the screen, so we want to set it back to null. I hope that makes sense. And this is the composable pretty much complete now. So let's now head back to the sign up form and just log out a message after this is done. I'm going to say console.log user signed up. And that's only going to fire after this whole function is complete. So that is after they've signed up and after we've updated the profile. So let me save this now, and I'm going to come over here. I'm going to refresh, and I'm going to go to sign up again. Now I'm going to use my name, Sean, and then I'll say sean@google.com, and we'll say test 1 2 3. In fact, no, we'll just say test because I want to show you if there's an error. So I'm going to try and sign up, and now we can see we get this error message back. Password should be at least 6 characters. This still fired because we got to the end of the function, but it doesn't mean they did sign up. And if I go to our users and refresh, we're not going to see that user there because the password wasn't long enough. So this is some built-in validation from Firebase. It's checking that the password is at least 6 characters long. You can add in your own front-end validation as well to make this a bit different, to make it maybe 10 characters long. This is just Firebase, and that's the error we've got back when we've tried to sign up with a password that is 4 characters long, and that error is being logged out right here. Okay, so now I'm going to say test 1 2 3 4 instead, which is 8 characters. I'm going to sign up, and we see user signed up again. And now if we check this out and refresh, we should be able to see, yep, we've signed up. And if we log out the response object again after we've done this, let me do that. I'm going to say console.log response.user. This time I'm going to save it. I'm going to try signing up one more time. I'm going to refresh first of all, go to sign up, display name Mario, email mario@google.com, and then test 1 2 3 4. I'm going to sign up. And now when we see the user object right here, if we scroll down, we can see display name is now Mario. And that's present because of this update profile right here. Okay then, so now we've created this use signup composable, which has this signup method to sign up the new user with an email and password, and then also update their profile. Now we also return the error down here as well, which is updated right here if there is an error, and that's this ref that we declare at the top. Now in the sign up form where we use this composable, we get the error if there is one as well. So down here where we use the sign up method, if there's an error when we do that sign up, this will get a value. So what we could do is we could return that value down here, and then we could output that error in the form if there is one. So I'm going to do that above the button. I'm going to say div and give this a class equal to error, like so, and then close off that div. And inside that, I'm going to output the error. So error, like so. Now remember, this class we styled in one of the earlier lessons of this project, and it was in the global styles main.css right here. So we gave this a reddish color and a font size of 14 pixels. So it will get those styles, and if there's no error, like to begin with, or if we successfully sign up, then it's not going to show anything here. We don't really need to do a v-if, because if this is null, then it's not going to output null. It's just nothing will be output at all. Now, if the error does have a value, then it will be output here, and it will be whatever message we get back. So let me now save this sign up form and view this. What I'm going to do is try to sign up as the same user I did before. Now, we can't do that. Oops, I don't want to spell out before. I want to say google.com. We can't do this. If a user already exists with that email address, which I think it does, mario@google.com, then Firebase will send us back an error. And that error will be passed into this catch block right here, and we will update the error value. So then it will be output to the screen, because the user can't sign up with an email that someone else has already signed up with. So let's give this a whirl. Mario@google.com. Oops, that's the display name field. Let me paste that here. We'll just say the display name is Mario, and the password is test 1 2 3 4. So if I try to sign up now, then notice we get this error message right here. The email address is already in use by another account. Now, if I change this to something else, like Luigi, and change this to Luigi as well. Now, I'm going to change the password to just test. If I try and sign up now, then notice now the error is password should be at least 6 characters. So let's change this to test 1 2 3 4 and sign up. And now the error message goes, and we should have signed up. If I refresh, we should see Luigi@google.com. So that's nice. Now we're outputting errors on the form when there are some. So we've seen now how to create a use sign up composable function which signs a user up. Now we're going to do a similar thing for logging a user in. So I'm going to create a new composable to do that called useLogin.js. Now in here there's going to be a few similarities to use sign up, including these three things at the top. So let me copy those and paste them in. So we import ref, we import project auth, and we set up an error ref as well. The next thing I want to do is create a login function called login. It's an async function, and this function is going to take in an email and a password. Now again, we're not declaring the login function or the error inside the use login function that we'll create, and the use login function is what will be returned because we don't need to create a new instance of this function and this ref every time we use this composable. That doesn't make sense. So now what I'm going to do is create the use login function. So const use login, that's equal to a function, and inside here all I want to do is return the values, and that is error and the login. Okay, then at the end we need to export default, and we want to export use login like so. Alright then, so now we can work on this login function. The first thing I'm going to do is set the error value to be null, because again, every time we try to log in, we need to reset that error. So we'll say error.value is equal to null. The next thing I want is a try catch block, so we can try to log in and catch an error if there is one. So inside the try block, we'll say const res for response is equal to await, and it's going to be project auth dot sign in with email and password, this one right here. So another long method. Now we pass in two arguments here, the email and the password, which we are going to take in to this login function, and then when we use this function from this component, we can pass those in using these values right here. Okay, so this tries to log in the user with that email and with that password. Now then, if there's an error, we're going to catch the error right here, and we'll log that to the console, console.log error.value, and then underneath that I'm going to say error.value is equal to, and we'll make this up ourselves, incorrect login credentials. Something like that. And that's instead of showing the blanket one to the user. We can see this in the console, so we know what's going on, but we'll just show this one to the user. Okay, so we have that now. Now, after we've done this right here, what I'd like to do is set the error value to null, because if it gets down here, then it means that this has been a success. So I'll say error.value is equal to null at that point. If there is an error, like I said, we'll catch it right here and update the error value here. If there's not an error, it moves on and we set that error value to null again. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just console.log the response right here, this object, to see that, and then I'm finally going to return the response object as well, just so that later if we call this login function, we can use that return value in our component. Okay then, so that is pretty much it. So now we can start to use this inside our login form component. So the first thing I'm going to do is import it. So import use login from, and we want to go up a level, / into composables, then / use login, and now we can call it down here. So I'll do that below the refs, const, and we want to extract the error and the login function and set that equal to use login like so. Okay, so now what I'd like to do is invoke this login function when they submit the form inside this handle submit function. So let's get rid of this, we don't need that anymore, and instead we'll await the login function, and we await it because this is asynchronous. We see right here async. So we're calling that function, we need to pass in the email and password, so email.value and password.value as well. So it tries to log the user in. Now, if there's not an error, that means the user is logged in, right? So if this error remains null after this is complete, it means it's been a success. So what I'm going to do is say if, and then not error.value, then we are going to say user logged in the console. Alright, so we try to do this. If there is an error, we're going to get that error back, and in that case, this right here will not pass, and so it won't fire this. If there isn't an error, it means that this right here is true and it will fire this. So we're checking that there isn't an error before we log this to the console. So let's give this a whirl. I'm going to save it, and I've noticed there's an error over here, failed to compile, and that's because we're trying to use await without using async right here. We need to use async to mark the function as asynchronous if we use await inside it. So now if I save this, should work. I'm going to open up the console so we can see this, and I'm going to try to log in with an email that doesn't exist. So wario@google.com, and we'll say test1234. Try to log in, and we see we get an error right here, and this response object is undefined. So this, if we go back over here, this is undefined. However, if we go back over here and change this to Mario and log in, then the response is this thing right here, and we can see now user logged in as well. So this is the response object with the user property on it. Okay, so now if there is an error, I'd like to output it right here. So let's go back over here and into the login form. And all we need to do is return the error down here so we can use it in the template. And then at the top, what we're going to do is output this error above the button. So let's do a div with a class equal to error, like so. And then inside that div, we need to output the error. And again, we don't need to use v-if on this to check if there's an error, because if it's null, it's just not going to output anything. So I'm going to save that and come over here. I'm going to refresh and try wario@google.com again and test1234. I'm going to try and log in, and now we can see incorrect login credentials, which is the error we specified right here. Okay, so this is all working now, and if I change this to Mario, that error should go because we're correctly logging in. Okay then, so we currently have our sign up screen and we have our login screen as well, but when we try to log in and enter in the password right here, when we do that, nothing happens. Now at this point, when we log in or when we sign up and it's successful, then I want to redirect them to the chat room itself, because they're now logged in and they can go ahead and chat. So the first step in doing this is to create a new chat room view, which is what I'm going to create inside the views folder. So we'll call this chatroom.view, and then inside this we'll create our template, script and style tag. Inside the template, I'm going to do a paragraph tag which just says chat room. So now I want to set up a route for this. I can cross this component off now. So if we go to our route file and add in a new object for this route, the path is going to be /chat room, and the name is going to be chat room, and finally the component is going to be chat room, and we need to import that component. So let's change welcome to chat room there, and I'm just going to try this out. So /chat room, yep, and we can see that component right there. It doesn't look great, but we'll come to that later. For now, what I'd like to do is focus on redirecting the user to that route when they've successfully logged in or signed up. So how then are we going to do this? Well, what I'd like to do is emit a custom event from the login component when a user logs in, and also emit a custom event from the sign-up component when a user signs up. And then we can listen for those custom events inside the welcome components where we nest the login form and the sign-up form. So this is where we're emitting the custom events from these two components. We'll listen for them right here, and then we can react to them by redirecting them to the chat room component. So first of all, we need to emit a custom event from login and sign up. So let's do that. I'm going to go to the login form, and we want to emit this custom event right here. So after a user has logged in and there's no errors, that means they are successfully logged in, and I want to emit a custom event right here. So how do we do this inside the setup function? Because earlier in previous chapters, we said something like this dot emit. And we did that when we used the options API. But inside the setup function, we can't do this because remember, we don't have access to the this keyword. It's undefined. So this won't work. So instead, we have to use something called the context object, which we get as a second argument inside the setup function. So the first one is always props. The second one is a context object, and that contains methods and properties that we can use inside a Vue component. And one of those is the emit method. So I can come down here and say context.emit, and then this works the same way. So instead of this.$emit, it's just context.emit, and then we can emit a custom event. So in our case, it's just going to be a login event. So now what we could do is listen for that login event inside the welcome component. So let's do that. I'm going to say @ and then the event was called login, and we'll set that equal to something. Now what I'm going to do is set that equal to a function called enter chat, and I'll create that function down inside the setup function now. So I'll come down here and say const enter chat is equal to a function, and then we need to return that function down here. Okay, so in here, this is where we want to redirect them to the chat room. Now to do that, remember, we need the router. So I'm going to say const router is equal to use router, like so, and we need to import that at the top. So import use router, and that is from the Vue-router. So we have this router object now, and we can use it to redirect the user by saying router and then .push, and we can pass in an object or a string value, which would be the path. In our case, I'm going to pass through an object which says the name is the chat room. So now it's going to take us to the chat room component. So before I try this out, I want to do the same thing for the sign up form. So this thing right here, I'm going to copy, and I'm going to paste inside sign up over here. So get rid of this and then paste it in. So again, remember, we get the error back from use sign up. Now, if there's no error, if the error is null, it means the sign up was successful. So then we can emit this custom event. But this time, I don't want to call it login. I want to call it sign up. And then we need to accept props and context right here. So we can use that emit function. That's all there is to it. Now, if we go into the welcome components, I'm going to go up here and say @sign up and set that equal to a function, which is enter chat, the same one, because we're doing the same in both cases. We're just redirecting the user to the chat room component. So now let's give this a whirl. I'm going to sign up first of all. So head to the sign up component, and we'll choose Peach. And these are all Mario characters, by the way, not just making them up. And then we'll use peach@google.com and test 1, 2, 3, 4. Sign up. Once it's done, it should redirect us to the chat room, but it's not. Let me just refresh over here and try that again. I'm going to go to sign up, and then I'm going to say Bowser this time, and then Bowser@google.com, test 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to sign up, and now we get redirected to the chat room. Awesome, so that works. Now let's try logging in. So let me now log in as Mario@google.com and test 1, 2, 3, 4. Log in, and hopefully, yep, that works as well. So now we're redirecting the user to the chat room once they've signed up or once they've logged in. Okay, so now we have our login and sign up flow complete, and they're both redirecting to the chat room. We can start to work on this chat room component. Now, the first thing I want to do is create a little navbar at the top of this chat room, and in the top left of the navbar, we will show the user's display name and their email, so who they're currently logged in as. And then in the top right of the navbar, we're going to show a button that a user can click to log back out. So let's start by creating a component for this navbar. I'm going to come to component and say new file, call this navbar.view, and then inside here, let's just boilerplate this by typing view and enter, and we'll work on the template first of all. So there will be a nav in here, And then inside that nav, we're going to have two things. We're going to have something on the left, which is their details, their display name and email, and then on the right, a button to log out. So what I'm going to do is create a div for the stuff on the left, and inside that div, we'll just say, hey there, ... and later on, we're going to output the display name here. So display name here, right? And then underneath that, I'm going to do another paragraph with a class of email this time, so we can style it differently. And I'm going to say currently logged in as ... and this is where the email will go later. So now we have this stuff on the left. On the right, we need a button to log out. So now we have this component. I want to nest it inside the chat room component over here. So let's first import it. I'm going to say import navbar from, and then we want to say ... / to come out of the views folder, then into components, and then we want the navbar.view file. Okay, so now we can register it down here, components, and we want the navbar, and now we can use it inside the template itself. So first of all, I'm going to delete this stuff right here, then create a div with a class of container. And remember, this is the same class that we used inside the welcome screen right here, this container, and that container has styles that come from the main.css right here. So it's going to put it in a central kind of bubble of content. So let's get rid of that again and go back to the chat room. And inside this container, this is where I want to nest the navbar component. Alright, so let's save that and view it. And it looks terrible, but that is the navbar content. So now let's just add a few styles to the navbar itself. So first of all, the nav, and in fact I will copy and paste these from my repo so you don't have to watch me type them out. So the navbar itself, this, we give that a bit of padding, a border bottom of 1 pixel solid and a very light grey, display of flex, and that's so that this and this sit next to each other automatically. That's what happens when the parent is flex. Then we justify the content to space between, and that means that there's going to be space between this, and so this will be on the very left and this on the very right. And then we align items center, that's vertically, so they're aligned in the center. The paragraph tag, we give that a bit of margin, and there's two of those, these two here. We give them both a bit of margin, 2 pixels top and bottom. Font size 16 pixels, color is kind of a deep grey. The email paragraph, we reduce that font size and change the color. So let's say this and preview, and that looks a bit better. So this is going to sit at the top of our chat room. So we show their display name here and their email here, and then we're going to click on this thing to log back out. And I'm going to show you how to log out next. Okay, so we currently have this logout button right here, and I want to hook it up so that when a user clicks on it, they are logged out of the application. Now, currently, if they're on the login screen or the sign up screen and they successfully do one of those, then they're logged in and they're redirected to this chat screen right here. If they click on this, I want to log them back out. So to do this, I'm going to create a new composable called use logout, and this is the way I like to make my applications, by creating these composables right here. So I'm not just limiting the functionality of these different services to a single component and then maybe repeating my code later on. I can just use these composable functions over and over again in different components when I need them. So in here, we're going to do a few things similar to the other composables, in that we need these three things at the top. So I'm going to copy those and paste them in. So we still import ref, and we still import project auth, and we still create an error ref. So now I'm going to create the logout function. So const logout is equal to an async function, and we also need our use logout function, which is the thing that we're going to export. So const use logout is equal to a function, and then we return right here the logout function and also the error. So we return these two things, which are these two, but we want to export this function. So export default use logout. So now when we use this function inside another component somewhere, then we can extract these two values from that, and that will be these two. Okay, so inside the logout function, the first thing I want to do is reset the error, just in case there was one. So I'll say error.value is equal to null, and then I'm going to try and log out. So I'll do a try and catch block, and we catch the error if there is one. Inside the try block, I'm going to await, and then we use project auth. This is how we interact with the authentication system, remember, and then we use a method on this called sign out, and that's all there is to it. So this will sign out the user, the current user that is logged in, and then if there's an error, we catch that error, and we'll just log the error to the console. And then also we'll update the error, so error.value is equal to error.message. Okay, so now we have this function pretty much sorted right here. All we need to do is use this function inside our navbar component. So let's import it. Let's go to the script and import use logout from, and then we come out of this folder first of all into composables, and then we want use logout. Okay, so now we can use that down here inside the setup function. So let's say const, and we want the logout function and also the error. Set that equal to use logout and invoke that function. And now we can call the logout function when a user clicks on this button. So let's attach a click event to this first, @click, and set that equal to a function which we'll call handle click. We need to create that function down here. So const handle click, set that equal to a function, and then we need to return this function so it can be used up here in the template. So let's do that as well. Return handle click, like so. And inside this, I want to log out the user. Now this has to be an async function because this logout function right here is asynchronous in itself. If we take a look at that, we can see. So I need to await that. So I'll say await logout, like so. And then if there's no error, so not error.value, which is this error we get back right here. So if there's no error at that point, what I want to do is just log to the console user logged out. Okay, so let's give this a whirl. I'm going to open up the console, and let me go to the console by clicking on this. Get rid of all this stuff. I'm going to refresh, and now if I click on this, we should see user logged out. Awesome. So that's all there is to it. So to log a user out using firebase auth, we just use this sign out method on our project auth object, and this sends a request to Firebase to log that user or sign that user out of the application. So Firebase no longer sees them as signed in. Okay, so we're allowing users now to sign up, log in and log out, but at the minute that doesn't really mean anything when it comes to our application. We're not doing anything with the user and we don't really know that they're logged in at all. So what I'd like to do is eventually show the user details right here, and then maybe also protect this route from people that are not logged in. So how do we go about doing that? Well, Firebase makes this really easy to do. So what we can do is we can use the Firebase SDK to check if there's a user logged in, and if there is, it returns to us an object which represents that user, and that object would contain user information like their email and their display name, which we could then output right here. Now, if there's not a user logged in, Firebase returns to us a null value instead, and then if we get that null value, we can be certain that they're not logged in. So how do we get this user? Well, what I'm going to do is create a composable to get this user. So new file, and I'm going to call this get user.js. And typically this is how I call all of my composables, either get something or use something. So inside here, we want to now use Firebase to get the current user. So the first thing I'm going to do in this file is just import a couple of things. So we need ref because we're going to create a user value and it will be a ref value. And we also need project auth because we use this object to interact with the Firebase authentication service, and we're going to use that to actively listen for authentication changes in our application. So when a user either logs in or signs up or logs out and there is a change in authentication status, Firebase will let us know that, and at that point we can update our user variable or user value, which will be a ref. So let's create that user ref first of all. So const user is equal to ref, and to begin with I'm going to leave this initial value blank, and we'll come back to that later. But next, what I'd like to do is use the project auth object to listen for authentication changes, and the way we do that is by using a method Firebase provides us with called onAuth state changed, like this. Now this takes in a callback function as an argument, and this function will fire every time there is a change in authentication status. So if a user logs in, the function will fire. If a user logs out, it will fire. If they sign up, it will fire. And at that point we also get access to the current user as an argument. So I'm going to call this underscore user because we already have user over here, so I don't want to mix them up. So this one is underscore user, and that's the user we get back every time there is an authentication change. Now, if the user signs up or logs in, then this variable will be that user object. If they've logged out, then this value will then be null instead. So I'm going to delete these parentheses because we only have one argument. Inside this function, what do I then want to do? Well, I want to take the user value, which is this thing right here, and I want to set it equal to whatever user is. So either null or the user object. I'm also going to log out this thing to the console so we can see over here when it changes. So I'll say console.log, and then inside here we'll say user state change current user is, and then we'll output underscore user as well. Okay, so now we need to actually make the get user function which returns this user. So let's do that. I'm going to create a constant called get user, which is equal to a function, and inside here we'll return an object with the user property. We might return other things in here later on as well, but for now just the user, which is this thing right here. And then at the end we need to export default use, or rather get user. Okay, so now what about this initial value when this file first loads? What's that going to be? Well, there's a property that we can use on project auth which gets the current user. So what we can say is project auth dot, and then we use a property called current user. So when the application first loads, if they're currently logged in, then it will be that value. If they're not, then it will be null. Okay, but then every time there's a change thereafter, we're updating the user with that new user object, either null or the user. So let's try using this now. I'm going to go over to the navbar, which is where we want to output the display name and the email, and I'm going to use this composable here. So what I'll do first of all is import the new composable we just created right here. So import get user from, and then / composables, and then we want the get user file. Okay, so now we can use it down here in setup, and below the logout one we'll say const, and we want the user object back, and we set that equal to get user like so. So remember, this is either going to be null if they're not logged in, or the user object if they are, and it's going to change whenever they change authentication status. So if they log out, it will become null. If they log in, it becomes that user object again. So now what we could do is output the different properties on this user object. But before we do that, I'm just going to save this and preview in the browser, and we can see currently the user is null. Now if we go back to the login screen and we say mario@google.com and test1234 to log in, then we should see user state change and the current user is, and now we get a user object. So inside this user object there's a lot of different information, display name, the email, and if we scroll down there's also things like photo URL, etc. We've not set any of this up, so we don't need to really worry about it, but what we can do is output the display name and the email inside this navbar. So let's do that. So over here I want to return the user, And then up inside the template, instead of this stuff, I can output the user display name. So user.display name, like so. And down here, I can output the email. So user.email. So let's save that and give this a whirl. Now we can see this stuff right here. So this is all working. But check this out. If I try to log out, I'm going to open up the console. We see an error right here. And we also see these details right here. Now, we shouldn't see them when we log out. And this error is saying it's trying to read the property display name of null. So that error is where we're trying to output it right here. And the same is true for the email. When we log out, remember, this becomes null. So we're trying to use the property display name on null after they've logged out, and the same for the email. So really, we only want to output this stuff if the user is currently logged in, if we have a value for the user. So how about we attach viv to this nav, because also we only then show the logout button if they're currently logged in. There's no sense in showing it if they're logged out. So let me attach viv to this nav and set that equal to user. So if they're logged out and this is null, now we show none of this nav. If they are logged in, we show it all. Save this, and I'm going to come over here and refresh. Notice now the error's gone and we don't see the nav bar. But if I go back to the welcome screen and log in again, so mario@google.com and test 1 2 3 4, I'm going to log in, and now we can see these details right here. And this time when we log out, we hide them and there's no error. Awesome. So we just saw then that in the chat room component, we can hide the navbar when the user logs out. When they click on that logout button, if there's no user anymore, we hide the navbar. But I'd like to make it so that users that are not logged in cannot see this component at all. So if I wasn't logged in and I tried to go to /chat room, then it wouldn't let me view that component, and instead it would redirect me back to the welcome screen here and force me to log in or sign up first of all. So I would have to be authenticated in order to view this page. Now, to achieve this in our project, we're going to use something that's known as a route guard in Vue.js. And a route guard is basically just a bit of logic, a function that can run before a user enters a particular route. So for example, if I went to /chat room, before the component renders on the page for this route, we could run this route guard, this function. And that function could decide whether to let me enter this page or redirect me somewhere else. So we could do some logic inside that function to determine the current user, for example. If they're logged in, then we let them view this page and we render the component. If they're not logged in, then we would redirect them back to the welcome screen. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to create a route guard inside the index.js file inside the router folder. So a route guard is just a function, and our route guard is going to be an auth guard because we require authentication for a user to enter the chat room. So we create a function, and you can call it what you want, just do it something descriptive, and I'm going to call mine require auth. Set it equal to a function. And inside this function, we take in 3 arguments, and they're automatically passed in by Vue Router for us. And the first one is to, the next one is from, and the final one is next. Now, to represents the component or the route that we're going to. So in our case, we would be going to the chat room. From represents where we've come from, what route we've come from. So if I've come from the home page and I go to the chat room, it would be the home route or the welcome route in our case. And next is a function, and we call this function to either allow the user to enter the chat room or whatever component we're trying to get to, or redirect them. So now let's fill out this logic. So what I want to do is determine the current user, and to do that I can use the project auth thing that we export inside this right here. So I'm going to grab that, and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to import project auth, and this is going to come from, and it's going to be .. then into the firebase folder /config. And I can get the current user now by saying let user equal to project auth, like so, .current user. Now the reason I'm not using this get user composable right here is because we don't need to listen to auth state changes or anything like that. We just want the current user. So at this moment in time, when I'm trying to log in, who is the current user? That's all I want. So then, now we have that stored inside user. I can come down here and I'm just going to log something to the console. Console.log, and we'll say current user in auth guard, just so we can see who the user is at the point in time that this auth guard function fires, and then we'll output the user. So this thing right here. Okay, so now we need to register this route guard in one of our routes, and the route I want to do that is in this one right here, the chat room, because I don't want to allow people that are not authenticated, not logged in, to view this chat room. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to use a property called before enter. So what we're saying here is, before you actually enter this route, I want you to run some kind of function, and we're going to run the require auth function. So that fires this function. We automatically get these different arguments, and at the minute we're just getting the current user and logging that to the console. So we're not preventing the user from going inside this chat room at the minute. We're just logging the current user to the console. So then if I now go over here, I'm going to first of all refresh the page, then I'm going to inspect and go to the console, and I'm going to clear all this. So I'm going to try to go forward to the chat room again. So I do that, and you see I've gone to /chat room, but two things here. First of all, the current user is null. And secondly, we don't get to the chat room even though the URL is still up here. So that's fine, the current user is null. That's because we're not logged in. But why then do we not get to the chat room? Because we're not blocking them. We're not saying if the user is null, don't let them in. Well, that's because it runs this function and now it's kind of hanging. It doesn't know what to do next. And in order to carry on, we just say next. And that just allows the Vue router to carry on what it was doing in the first place. In our case, go to /chat room. So now it will carry on to that route and show that component. So if you don't use this, then it's never going to get to the route it needs to go to. So now I'm going to come over here and you can see we're at /chat room and we see the chat room component even though it's completely empty. But now we can get to it even though the current user is still null. Okay then, so now we want to do a check. If we have a user, then let the user get to that route. If we don't, then let's redirect them. So I'm going to say down here if, and then if we don't have a user, so if the user is null, then this is going to be true because we're negating it right here. So if we don't have a user, in that case, we want to redirect them back to the welcome screen. Now, the way we do this is not by using the Vue router. We just, again, say next. And then inside here, we don't want to go to the chat room, which this would do automatically because that's where we were going in the first place. Instead, we want to pass in an object which says the name of the route that we want to go to is the welcome route. So it's just like when we use the Vue router and we pass an object in, this time we use the next function. And then if that's not the case, if there is a user, then we'll just fire next as is, and that will take us to where we were going in the first place. In our case, the chat room. So let me do this. I'm going to clear out this and I'm going to try to go to /chat room, and it doesn't let us get there because the current user is null, so it's preventing that from happening, right? But if I log in now, I'm going to say Mario at google.com and then test 1 2 3 4. I'm going to log in and hopefully now we see the chat room. So now I can go back and forth between the chat room and the welcome screen by clicking on these history buttons because I'm logged in. But check this out. If I refresh the page, then it takes me back to the login screen. And why is that? Because I'm currently logged in. It shouldn't do that. It should only redirect me here when I'm not logged in. Well, it's the route guard doing this because when we first refresh the page, if we go to /chat room, when we first refresh the page, initially the user is null. But why is it null? Because we're logged in. Well, it's null because when the application first loads in the browser, it takes Firebase a small fraction of time to initialize and connect to the backend Firebase project. Now, until it does this, it doesn't know that we're logged in. and it doesn't know the current user. So the user is always null when we refresh until it figures that out. It's only after that tiny fraction of time it takes to connect to the backend that Firebase figures out the current user which is logged in, and we see that right here. Now this is only the case when we either refresh the page or we manually type in the page at the top. If we were just being routed by the application like when we log in, then it works like this, mario@google.com and test1234. If we navigate to it now, it should work, because Firebase is not needing to re-establish the connection. It already has that connection because the app was loaded, and we're not refreshing the page or anything like that. So it's only the case that this happens when we either refresh the page manually or type in the address and go to the address. Because every time we do that, then Firebase is trying to re-establish that connection. So we need to address this problem, because I don't want users to be redirected if they refresh the chat room page if they're logged in, and we'll solve that problem next. So we just saw the problem that we have when we're logged in but try to refresh the page on the chat room. It redirects us back to the welcome screen, and that's because the route guard right here is seeing that there's no current user, and it redirects us to the welcome screen. And there's no current user because Firebase, when we refresh the page, just takes a fraction of time to connect to the backend and figure out that the user is actually logged in. So we need to solve this problem, because I don't want to make it so that if a user refreshes the chat room and they're logged in, that it redirects us back to the welcome screen and they have to log in again. That's not what I want. So what we need to do is somehow figure out a way of waiting until Firebase establishes this connection with the backend and figuring out this user, waiting for that first authentication status change, and then firing the application. Does that make sense? So we kind of put the application rendering and all that jazz on hold until Firebase has established that connection. And that's what we're going to do now. So to do that, I'm going to head on over to the main.js file, which is where we first create the app and then mount it to the DOM. So it's this process right here I kind of want to halt until Firebase establishes that initial connection with the backend, and it first figures out whether the user is logged in or not. So when it first hears that initial authentication state change. Now to do this, we're going to import project auth from the Firebase config, because we're going to use this to listen for the initial authentication status or initial change. So when that change first occurs, that's when we've finally established the connection, and at that point we can then mount the app. So what I'm going to do is create a variable first of all called app, and then down here I'm going to say app is equal to this thing right here. So let me just put this on a few different lines so it looks a bit more readable. So we create the app, then we use the router, and then we mount the app. Now then, what I want to do is not render this until the authentication state first changes, and that's a sign that we've first established a connection with the backend. So I'm going to come down here and say project auth, and then I'm going to use the method onAuth state changed, and then this fires a function when it hears an authentication state change, so when it sees either a user first logged in or not logged in. And inside here I'm going to check, do we currently have a value for app? If we don't have a value for app, then what I'm going to do is run this code, right? And the reason I'm doing this is because this function right here is going to run every time the authentication state changes, and I don't want to run this function, for example, if the user logs out in the application. I then don't want to create the app again, so I need to make sure, look, it only run this bit right here and mount the app to the DOM if app doesn't currently have a value. But the first time we do this, then it does have a value, so this code will only ever run once, even though this function might run multiple times. So then, now this function right here is going to fire when we first establish that connection, and it's going to figure out the current user. Now, we don't need to do anything with that user. It's just that we're waiting for that initial user value before we're rendering the app. And then when we come to render the app and this function over here fires, at that point, this will be accurate because we've already waited for that connection. So it won't be null even though the user's logged in. All right. So hopefully this will now work. I'm going to go back over here and refresh, and I'm going to go to /chat room and hit enter. And now we see it. It doesn't redirect us. And if we refresh, it doesn't redirect us. So that all works now. All right then, so we've seen how this route guard right here is protecting our chat room route, so that if you're not logged in, you can't go to /chat room because it will then redirect you to the welcome screen. However, what if we're currently logged in and we can see the chat room and then we log out? Well, yeah, it hides the navbar, but it then doesn't redirect us, and that's not what a route guard does. A route guard only protects the route when we're trying to enter it, but we're currently on that route and we've just logged out. And we can still see this chat room component. Yeah, there's nothing on the screen, but later on we'll show all the chat messages. And I don't want a logged out user to be able to be on this route at all. So when a user is not logged in, I'd like to be able to detect that in this component and then redirect them to the welcome screen. So if they click on that log out button, for example. So I'm going to leave this as a challenge for you. So you'll need to go to the chat room components and create a setup function right here to do all this logic in. And what I'd like you to do is get the current user using our get user composable. I want you to watch the current user inside the setup function for user changes. For example, if they log out, and then when they do log out, if at any point the user becomes null, then I want you to redirect them to the welcome page. Okay, so we've seen how to do all of this kind of stuff in previous lessons. I just want you to put all that together to watch the user and then redirect them when they're no longer logged in. So pause it right here, have a good go, and then if you want to see my solution, just press play again. Alright then, so the first thing I'd like to do is get the current user using this get user composable. So I'm going to come inside setup and say const, and then we want to grab the user from this, and that's equal to get user, press enter, and it will auto import that for me. So now we have the user, and I want to be able to watch that user value. Now remember, to watch a value, we just use watch. Press enter, and it will auto import that from Vue for us. Let me just copy this, or rather cut it and paste it down here. So we have this watch function now, which fires a function when a specific value changes, and that value is the first argument. So we're going to watch the user. When that changes, it fires a function, and then we can do something in here. So what I want to check is if the user is null. So in essence, if user.value does not have a value, and it's user.value because this user is a ref, remember. Up here, you can see that this is a ref. So if the value of that ref is null or it doesn't have a value, then it means they're logged out. So let's check if user.value, and we want to place an exclamation mark in front of this to say, look, if we don't have a user, then we need to redirect you. Now, in order to do this, we need the router. So I'm going to say const router is equal to use router, and it's going to auto import that for me. This is a function. So now we have the router. Down here, we can say router.push, and we're going to push to the welcome screen. So name is welcome, like so. And then this should now work. So fingers crossed. I'm going to refresh, and when I refresh, first of all, it's going to redirect me to the home page because I'm logged out, and that's where the route guard will kick in. So let me just refresh. Yep, we get the login screen. So let me log in again, mario@google.com, and then test 1 2 3 4. I'm going to log in. We see the chat room. Now if I log out, hopefully, because it's watching the user in this component now and redirecting as soon as the user becomes null, it will take me back to the login screen. So log out, and voila, we get the login screen again. So this is now working. Okay, so now we have the authentication side of things pretty much set up so that only logged in users can enter the chat room and also stay in the chat room. Now what I'd like to do is move on to the chat room itself, and to begin with I want to create a little form at the bottom where a user can enter in a new chat message and hit enter to send it. So we're going to create that component first of all. Alright then, so let's head on over to the components folder and create a new file called new chat form.vue, and this component will eventually be nested inside the chat room view too. So let's work on the template. I'm going to type out Vue to boilerplate this, and inside the template it's just going to be a very simple form with one field, and that field is going to be a text area, and this is where they're going to actually write the message. Now we can get rid of all of this stuff. We'll style it from our styles down here later on. Now the text area itself, I would like to apply a few different properties too. So first of all, a placeholder, and I'm going to put these on separate lines so they don't go way off the screen over here. So placeholder, and I'll set that equal to type a message and hit enter to send. Okay, so that's the placeholder. Then also I want this to have a V model, so we can bind it to some data down here later on, and we'll call that data property message. Okay, so that will do for now. Now inside the object I'm going to create a setup function, and inside this, first of all, I would like to create a message ref so we can hook it up right here. So let's say const message is equal to a ref, press enter to auto import it right here. And then the initial value of this is just going to be an empty string. Okay, so now what I'd like to do is create a function which is going to handle the submission of this form, or handle an event whereby a user presses enter when they're inside the text area. So let me now say const, and we'll call it handle submit, and set that equal to a function. It's going to be asynchronous because we are eventually going to be making queries to the database, so let's mark it as async to begin with. And then inside here, what I'd like to do is first of all create a new chat object. Ultimately what we're going to be doing here is storing all of the chat messages in a firestore database. So what I'd like to do is create a chat object, if you like, which is going to represent those different records or documents that we're saving. So I'll say const chat and set it equal to an object. Each object or each chat is going to have three different properties. It's going to have the message itself. We also need to store who sent that message so we can display that in the chat room. We'll see how to do that in a second. And also when the message was created. So we'll need a timestamp for that. So first of all, let me do the message. And that is going to be the message.value. So this ref right here, whatever they type. Now the next thing is going to be the user that sent this message. Now we can get that user using this composable get user. So I will down here inside setup say const user is equal to get user, press enter to auto import that. So now we have that user, I can come down here and say the name of the person that sent it, that's what the property is going to be called, name, is going to be user.value because this is a ref, remember, and then we want their display name, so display name. So now we have those two properties on the new chat. The third one is going to be a created at property, and that needs to be a timestamp. Now remember, inside our firebase config, we exported that timestamp function right here. So let's just import that. I'm going to go up here and I'm going to say import, and I want the timestamp from, and it's // into the firebase folder /config. Okay, so now we just need to invoke that function. Okay, so now we've created this chat object after a user submits the form or presses enter on this text area. What I'd like to do eventually is send that chat to the firestore database to save it as a document inside a messages collection or something. We're not going to do that right now. All we'll do is console.log this chat object, and also after they've submitted the form I would like to empty the text area so that they could enter in a new message. So I'll just say message.value is equal to an empty string to do that. Okay, so now we need to return this value and this value down here so that it can be used, or they can both be used inside the template. So first of all message, and then handle submit, and then up here we can attach some kind of event listener to this text area. So what I'm going to do is say at key press to listen to key press events. Now I only want to react to the key press when it's an enter, and also I'm going to prevent the default action of the form when we press enter, and I'm going to set that equal to handle submit like so. Okay, so now when they press enter inside this text area, it's going to fire this function. It's going to create a chat object. We're using the current user that's logged in, and then we're getting the message and applying that to the chat object, also a timestamp, and then we're just logging this to the console before setting the value of message again back to an empty string. So now we need to nest this new chat form inside the chat room component so we can see it on the screen. And I'm going to do it below the navbar, but first of all, I need to import it. So let me, at the top over here, I'm going to get rid of this from the last lesson. Scoot this up. Let me import, and it's going to be new chat form from, and it's // to come out of the current folder, then into components, then new chat form.view. Alright, so down here we can register that inside the components property, new chat form, and then finally nest it up here, new chat form like so. So now I'm going to save that, and we can see this form at the bottom. It looks terrible, but let me open up the console and see if this works. Press this and go to console. I'm going to clear this out, and now if I say hello gang and press enter, we can see this object logged to the console right here. So it says Mario is the name, the message is hello gang, and created that. It's this kind of weird object. Remember, this is a firestore timestamp, and we can see right here that it has that field value. It doesn't mean much to us like this, but when it saves it to the firestore database, it will be saved as a timestamp to record the date and time that this was sent. So this is all working, and then once we've sent it, it empties the box so we can enter in a new message. Okay, and notice it got this name. This is the display name of me who is currently logged in. So this is all working, but I'd like to make it look a little better, so I'm going to go back to the new chat form component, and down here I'm going to set these to scoped so they don't affect any other forms. Remember, we have forms on the welcome screen. I don't want these styles that I'm creating right here to affect those, so I've put scoped, and that way it only affects the current component. So now you can see we have the form right here. Just give that a bit of margin, and the text area, we say width 100%, max width that as well, a bit of margin bottom, bit of padding. Border sizing is border box, there's no border, and the border radius is 20 pixels. Font family we inherit to make it look a little nicer than this font family, and then the outline is none. So if I save this now, it's going to look a bit better. We can see now, type a load of old garbage, press enter, this still works, and it looks nice as well. So now we have the form working. In the next video, what we'll do is we'll take this object right here and we'll send it to Firestore to create a Firestore document. Okay, so now we have this form working so that if I type a message and press enter, it logs this chat message to the screen, and it's a JavaScript object. What I'd like to do though is save this object as a document inside our Firestore database in some kind of collection, maybe called messages, so that later on I can reach out to that collection and list them all inside this chat room. So to do that, we're going to be creating a new composable, and this will be called use collection, because that's what we're doing at the end of the day. We're using this collection to add a new document. So the first thing I want to do is paste in a couple of imports. We're importing ref because we will have ref values, and also the project Firestore because this is what we use to interact with the database. Now the next thing I want to do is create this composable function called use collection. Set it equal to a function like so, and then we need to export it at the bottom of the page so we can use it in other components. So export default use collection like so. Now the first thing I'm going to do inside this function is to create an error ref. Now I'm going to set that to be null to begin with, and this time around I'm declaring this error ref inside the function use collection. Why am I doing that? Well, it's because we might use different collections in different positions in the website, and for each collection we need a new error if there is one. For example, imagine you had a website which listed blogs, right? And on the home page, you might have a list of blogs, the latest blogs. We would need an error for that resource if there was one, so we could display that. Now, in the sidebar, we might be using another collection, maybe authors, and we would need a separate error for that collection if there was one. So if we create this ref inside the function, it means that every time we use this function in a component, it's creating a new version of that error. And that's what we want, because every collection we try to get, it needs its own error. Now that's in contrast to when we used authentication, because there's only ever one kind of authentication. It's a user trying to log in, right? And if I'm on a website trying to log in, we don't need multiple different error objects because it's all one process, right? I'm not logging into the content and the sidebar, I'm just logging into the website, which is why we create this outside of the function, so we don't create a new version of the error every time we try to use this function. We just have one, and then we can pass that around. That makes sense. But in this case, just in case we use different collections in different points of the application at the same time, we need separate errors for each collection. And that's why I'm creating this and the function in a minute to get the documents inside this composable itself. All right. So the next thing we need to do is create a function to go out and add this document to the database. So I'm going to create a function called add doc, and I'm going to set that equal to an async function, and inside here this is where we're going to communicate with the firestore using project firestore. So I'll copy that to try and add a new document to a collection. So we're going to first of all say error.value and set that to null, because at the start of every request we want to reset the error. Okay, start from the beginning, and then I'm going to try and catch. So let me catch any error if there is one, like so. And inside the try block, we want to await first of all, and then project firestore.collection. Now we want to save it to a specific collection. Now I could hard code it and I could say, well, save it to the messages collection, but it doesn't then make this reusable. Like we were talking about a minute ago, we might use different collections in different positions in the application, and this renders it not reusable because it's always going to be going into the messages collection. So instead I want to pass in the collection right here to this composable function, and every time we use the composable function now we can pass in a different collection, and then we can just pass that inside here as well. So when I use it, I'm going to pass in messages later to this composable, and then this will connect to the messages collection. Okay, so after that, we just want to add a new document, and we've seen how to do this. We just use the add method. And remember, we pass in an object right here, which represents the document we want to save. Now, that object is this chat right here. So I need to accept as an argument into maybe this add doc function right here, that document. So I will do. And then we will add that doc. Okay, so that's all there is to it. That's all we need to do. But if there is an error, I want to update the error value and also log it to the console. So console.log error.message, and also we'll say error.value is equal to could not send the message. Okay, so now all we need to do is return this and this. So let's do that at the bottom. I'm going to return an object, and inside we have the error, and also add doc, the function. Cool. So we've created this composable, and now we can use it inside our new chat component. All right then. So first of all, up here, I want to say const add doc, and also we'll get the error is equal to use collection, and we pass in the collection, remember, which we want to use in this case, which is messages. Now we also need to import this. So let me copy this composable and change get user to use collection. All right, so now we have access to the error if there is one. So let's return that at the bottom first of all, and I'm going to output it somewhere below the text area. I'll just come below it and do a div with a class of error, like so, and output the error like this. Okay, so now I want to, inside the handle submit, use this function to add the new document instead of this right here, instead of logging it to the console. So let me say await, and I can use that because this is an async function, await add doc, and we need to pass in, remember, this document right here, whatever it is, which is just this chat object. So we'll pass it in the chat like so. So we're trying to do this. Now at this point, I only want to reset this if there's no error. So we wait for this to happen. Then I want to make sure there's no error. So if there's not error.value, so if there's no error at this point, then I want to reset this value. If there is an error, then we're just going to show that error message right here. Okay, so let's save this and give it a whirl. And in fact, we might get an error the first time we do this. And I'll tell you why that is in a second. Let me just type in hello and press enter. And let's wait to see. No, we don't get any error, so that looked like it did work. So the reason I thought we might have an error is because we didn't set up our Firestore database, but perhaps we did. And in fact, I know we did because in the previous chapter, or one of the previous chapters, we already set it up. So let me go now to Cloud Firestore to see this. Hopefully we should have now a new messages collection. And again, it didn't matter that this didn't exist when we tried to add the document to it. If it doesn't exist, Firebase will automatically create that collection for us. And we see we have this document created at the message and the name of the person that sent it. And if I add another one, so hey again, then we should see over here, we now get another document, hey again, cool. So now we're successfully adding these different documents. And by the way, I could log out and I'm going to try and log in with someone else, which is going to be Yoshi at google.com. Test 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not sure whether this is a user. We'll soon find out. Yes, it is. Close that. I'm going to say, hey, Mario, right here, and press enter. And now, hopefully, we should see another document from Yoshi. Oops, the name is null. So it looks like this authentication system right here didn't capture the display name of the user. So we must have created it before we added in, if we check out use sign up, this bit of code right here. So we must have signed up with that user before we created this code. So let's actually delete this user. And in fact, I'm going to delete most of them except for Mario. So let me delete Bowser as well and Peach, because I don't know whether I created these all a bit too early. So I'm going to get rid of all of these. And then what I'll do is I'll just sign up with Yoshi again. But before I do that, let me go and delete that document, which has a null name. So delete that document, start delete. And if I go back over here now, I'm going to log out and then I'm going to sign up instead as Yoshi. And this time around, it should capture this as my display name. So the email is going to be yoshi@google.com and then test 1, 2, 3, 4, sign up. And now we can see that we have the username right here. And if I say, hey, Mario, and press enter, hopefully now we should be able to see that that document, wherever it is, has the name Yoshi. Awesome. So now this works. Okay, so now we have a few chat message documents inside our Firestore. I'd like to be able to reach out and get those so we can show them in some kind of chat window component on this page. Now, in order to do this, we're going to be using a real-time listener, much like we saw in the last chapter, whereby when new documents are added or changed over here, it sends us a snapshot to the front end, which we can capture in the browser, and we can use that updated data to show it to the user in real time. So every time someone sends a chat, it appears here automatically without having to refresh the page. So let's create a composable to do this. New file, and I'm going to call this getCollection.js. So this is getCollection to set up a listener to get the documents. UseCollection is to do something with the collection, like add a new document to it. So we're using this in here. We're just getting the documents, all right? Now, the first thing we need to do is import a couple of things. So I'm importing ref and project Firestore so that we can communicate with the database and also store some values. The next thing is to create a function. So const get collection is equal to a function, and this is where we're going to set up that real-time listener. Now again, I want to take in the collection right here because we might use this in different places in the web app. Probably not in this project, but I like to set it up this way so that if I ever wanted to extend it and use multiple collections, I can do that because now I'm just passing that collection into this function. Now, at the end, I just want to export this. So export default get collection. So the first thing I'm going to do inside this function is to create a couple of refs, one for the error and one for the documents. So I'm going to say const documents, and this will be equal to a ref, which will start at null. And once we have the documents from the collection, then we're going to populate those right here. The other one is for the error. So let's say const error is equal to ref, and also that begins as null. Now notice this time I'm creating the refs inside this function right here and not outside of the function like we did before inside these authentication composables. Right here we have the error outside of the use sign up composable, and also this thing right here, this function, is outside of it as well. So why this time are we placing them inside the function? Well, think about it. If we wanted to use two collections in two different places on our website, for example, if we had a homepage with one resource listed like blogs, and then in the sidebar we had another resource listed like authors, we would need an error for each of those, and we'd need a documents ref for each of those. They wouldn't be global variables or global refs that we just declare once outside here, because we'd have two different types of data. So we have to declare them inside the function so that in any component that we call this function, it creates a new version of documents and a new version of error for that particular component. We don't need that with use sign up because we're only signing up in one place, and we're not going to have two sign up processes going on at once on the website from one single user, whereas we will maybe have two get collection processes going on from one single user for two separate collections. Maybe not so much in this example where we're just working with chat messages, but generally I like to do it this way because in the future then, if I did extend this project to use more than one type of collection and we're showing those simultaneously on the screen, then this would work better. So next what I want to do is create a reference to our collection. So I'm going to store this reference in a variable, and I'm going to call it collection ref and set it equal to project firestore dot collection to go into a collection, and the collection we want is the collection that we pass in to the function itself. So we'll just pass that in there. In our case, that's going to be messages, but this makes it a bit more reusable. Okay, so after that, I want to order by the created at property. So we have our collection reference right here. And the reason I've stored it inside a variable is so that we can use this for different things should we need it for different things later on. So normally what I would do is just tack on the end on snapshot like so. But now because we've stored it in a variable, I'm not going to do that. I'm instead going to take that collection ref and say dot on snapshot. And this does the same thing. It just means that now I can reuse this collection ref for something else as well in the future inside this function if I needed to. So remember, on snapshot is how we set up a real-time listener to the Firestore database. And each time there's a change in that database collection, for example, if a document's added or changed or deleted, it sends us back a snap, and we fire a callback function when that happens, and we get access to that snapshot. So that snapshot contains all of the documents and all of the data of those documents at that moment in time, just after that change occurred. So what I'm going to do is create a local variable called results and set that equal to an empty array first of all. And what I want to do now is cycle through the snapshot documents and add each document to this array. So I'm going to say snap.docs.forEach to do that. And we fire a callback function for each document in that array. We get access to that doc right here, and I'm going to delete those parentheses. And then what I'd like to do is create a new object for each document and place that in here. And that new object is going to contain all the data from this document and the ID from the document. So what I'll do is say results, which is this array right here, dot push to add on a new item, and that is going to be a new object. And each object, like I said, will have the doc data. So we use the data function to get that. Now I want to spread all of these out. So we need spread syntax ... And that creates properties and values for each of those items inside the data, inside this object. And then after that, I want an ID property, and that is going to be on the document directly, doc.id. So now we have an object with all of the data properties, so all of these things on it, and an ID, which is this thing right here as well. And we're pushing each of them onto the results right here. Now there's one little bit of code I have to place at the start of this line, and that's as follows. I have to say doc.data to get the data, .created at, and then double ampersand, and then all of this. So this is logical and the code on the right will only ever execute if the code on the left is true. Now then, if I didn't add this line right here, or this bit of code to the line, then our app will use a local version of the snapshot when we make a change to the data, and a local version of the timestamp as well, created at. And it wouldn't have had a chance to be created on the server because the timestamp isn't created in the browser when we first use it. So if I go to new chat form, we invoke it right here, but the timestamp is not created until this reaches the server. So if I don't add this right here, we'll get a local version of the snap, and it will use the local created at right here. Now this is the default correct behavior of Firebase real-time listeners. When a snapshot occurs, it provides us with a local calculated version of the data change so that it's very quick. So when we, for example, send this request right here, where is it? Not in sign up, in new chat form. When we send this request to add a new document, in the browser on the front end, Firebase triggers a local snapshot. And that local snapshot takes into consideration what we're trying to do on the database. So it creates a local version of that snapshot, and it doesn't wait for one to come back from the database so that we can have a quick experience in the browser. But in our case, if that happens, then this created at property right here will not fully exist yet because, like I said, it's created on the server. So if we left this out like this, it would use the local snapshot, and the data would contain that created at property, but the created at property would not be a full timestamp yet. It would just be a reference to a timestamp, if you like, because it needs to go to the server first, be created, and then come back to the browser. So I need this in. So when the change actually occurs in the database, it sends back the actual snapshot, and then we fire this function again, and then we run this code, and then this will be true. Initially, the local snapshot, this will be false. And then when we get it back from the server, it will be true. So we need to add that little line of code for this to work. Now, you don't always have to do this kind of thing. It depends on your application. But in this instance, when we're using real-time data and we're going to be displaying the date on the page later on as well, we need to wait for that timestamp to be created on the server before it comes back. So I hope that makes sense. It's a little complicated to get your head around, but hopefully it makes a little bit of sense. Alright then, so now when we get the data back from the database, we're pushing each one of the data objects onto this results right here. Now after all of this is done, after we've created this local results right here, what I'd like to do is then update this data over here, the documents data. So underneath this for each loop, I'm going to do that. I'm going to say documents.value is equal to the results, the array we created right here. Okay, so that's once we have all of the documents inside this array. And also, if this has all worked, I want to set the error value to be null. So error.value is equal to null, just in case there was one at some point before. Now then, with this, we don't use a try and catch block, and instead what we do is we fire a second callback function if there's an error. So the first callback function is if we get a correct snapshot. The second one down here is if we get some kind of error. And in that case, we fire a different function. And this time around, we get access to the error object. So it's a little bit different than how we've done it using try and catch before, but this is just the way the onSnapshot method works. So inside this function, all I'm going to do is console.log error.message. And also I'm going to update the documents value to be null. And then finally, I'm going to update the error value to be something like could not fetch data. So this only happens if there's some kind of error. Now the last thing we need to do is return these two values, because these are the things that we'll need inside our component later on. So let's return those as well. Return an object, and inside documents and error like so. So now we have this composable get collection to set up a real-time listener. In the next lesson, we will create a chat window which will use this composable and eventually output all of the chat messages in real time. So now we have this get collection composable, which is setting up a real-time listener to get the data, but we're not using it anywhere yet. So what I'd like to do is create a component called chat window, which is going to sit between the navbar and the message box in the middle. That's going to use this composable to set up the real-time listener, get all of the data, and output the chats to the screen. So let's create that new component first inside the components folder. Call it chat window.view. And in here, boilerplate the component. And then inside the script, I first of all want to import get collection. So import get collection from, and it's .. to come out of the directory, then into the composables directory, and then we want get collection. Okay, so now inside the setup function, we can invoke that and get the data, the documents, and the error that we return from it. So let's say const, and we want the error and the documents from that composable. And don't forget, we have to pass in the collection name. It receives it here and uses it right here. So let's pass it in. It's messages. Okay, so now we can return these two things, so we can use them in the template. Return, and we want to return the error and documents. Okay, so now let's create the template. So first of all, I'm going to create a div with a class of chat window, and that's going to surround the entire chat window. Then I'm going to output an error if there is one. So let me do a div to output this, and we'll attach a viv and set it equal to error. So this begins as null, but if there is an error, then we update that value. No, we don't. Something's going wrong here. We've just not entered onto a new line. So we update that error value right here with this error could not fetch the data. So if we get this value, then it will no longer be null, and we can output the error right here. Okay, I cannot spell error for some reason. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to do is check, do we have documents? And if we do, let's output those messages. So I'm going to do another div for this and apply viv to this to see if we have documents. Now again, that's going to begin as null right here. But once we have those documents, we update the documents value right here. So let me now come over here and we can output them. So we need to cycle through them, but first of all, let me give this container a class and set that equal to messages like so. Now inside here, what I'd like to do is use a v4 to cycle through every document inside the documents. So let's do a div to do that and attach v4 to that and set it equal to, and we'll call it doc in documents. Now you can call this what you want right here, but this has to be documents. Now we need to bind to the key attribute, and that is going to be equal to doc.id, so the ID attached to each document. And then I'm going to apply a class to this so we can style it in a second, and we'll call that class single because it's a single document or a single chat. So in here we've got three things to output. We've got the created at, the date, we've got the name of the person who sent it, their username, and also the message itself. So I'm going to output each one inside a span, and we're going to give each one a class as well so we can style it. So the first one is going to be created at, and that is going to be for the created at property. So let me output doc.created at like so, and then we need another span tag, this time with the class of name, and this is for their name, so doc.name. And then finally the message itself, so span.message, and then doc.message. So they're the three properties on each document that we're outputting now. Okay, so now we have this. Let's import it into our chat room component and use it. So I'm going to duplicate this and change new chat form to chat window, like so. And then I'm going to register it right here first, chat window. And then we need to use it below the nav bar, but above the new chat form. So chat window, like so. Okay, so let's save this and preview. And if we refresh, then we get all of this stuff, but two things, it looks horrible. And secondly, this thing right here, we're just outputting the timestamp. Now we don't want to do that. We want to output some kind of date. So I'm going to go over here, and right here we can use the toDate method on this, and it turns it into a date. This is not how I want it to look in the end, because it's still completely useless. We don't want it to say something like that. It would be better if it says something like 3 minutes ago or 2 hours ago or something like that, and we'll do that shortly, but for now we'll leave it at this. Alright then, so finally I just want to apply some styles so this does look a bit better. So I'm just going to paste these in down here at the bottom, and you can see the chat window right here, which is the thing that surrounds it all. This we give a background of a very light grey and some padding. The single div, which is this thing right here. So for each message we have a div with a class of single, and we give each one a margin of 18 pixels. Then the created at span, display block, grey colour, small font size and a margin bottom. The name is bold and the margin right is 6 pixels. The messages div, which is this thing right here that surrounds all the messages, that we say has a max height of 400 pixels and overflow auto, so we can scroll up and down. So let's save this and preview, and that looks a bit better. So we can see the name on the left, the text on the right, the time or the date at the top. We need to sort this out, and we'll do that next. But before we do that, I just wanted to show you this in action. So if I type in hello, press enter, we should see an automatic update right here, because we have that real-time listener set up. So when there's a change in the database over here, it sends a snapshot to us, and with that snapshot it's updating this documents property right here inside our get collection. That's what we do every time we have a new snapshot. We update the documents value, and so since that's updated right here, we update the DOM to match those new documents, and we see the new document right here. Alright then, so now we are successfully outputting all of our chat documents, all of our messages, and it's working in real time. So if I type a message, then we see it right here. Okay, so this is all good, but this date time thing looks ridiculous. Doesn't really mean anything at a glance. Now, I'd like to format it in a way so it's more meaningful, and it says something like 2 minutes ago or 2 hours ago or something like that. And to do that, we're going to be using a third-party package called datefns. So if we go to the home screen, we can see down here, it allows us to do things like this. We can use a function to output a date string in a different format, like 3 days ago. And this is the kind of thing I want. So if you go to the documentation and then go to installation, we can see down here, this is how we install it right here. So since I've got a new version of Node and a new version of NPM, I don't need the save flag. I'm just going to copy this bit right here, which says npm install datefns. Then I'm going to open up a terminal in my project, and I'm going to paste it inside here and press enter to install it. And now that's installed, I can use it inside this chat window component. And the way we do that is by importing whatever function we need from the datefns library. So this library comes with a load of different functions to format dates in many different ways. So I want something that looks a little bit like this down here, where it says something like 3 days ago. And this one is the format distance function. Now the one we're going to use is very similar to that, but it's not quite called that. What I'll do is import, and we'll destructure the function from the library, and it's called format distance to now. And that comes from date-fns. And remember, that's stored inside our Node modules folder now. So we have that imported. Now we can create our formatted date time. Now we're going to create a computed property to do this, because remember, we're creating a new property, a new formatted property based on something that already exists. So to do that, we create a computed property. Now I'm going to call this formatted documents. All right. And all I'm going to do is cycle through the documents in here, and I'm going to return a new array, but update the datetime property to be a formatted date in each case. So I'm going to set that equal to computed, and when I press enter, it should auto import that. Inside here, remember, we fire a function which returns a value. Now, what I want to do first of all is check, do we currently have documents? Because I don't want to try and cycle through the documents if they're null. That makes no sense. So I'll say if, and then documents.value. And that way, only when we have the documents will it first fire this code. So we need to return an array here of documents, and we're going to return a mapped array. So we're going to take the current documents.value, which is the array of documents we have that we're currently outputting right here. And then we're going to use the map method on this, which, remember, returns a new array based on the old one. Only this time we can return updated, formatted documents inside it. So for each document, we fire a function and return a new value. Now I'm going to create a variable called time, and that is going to be the formatted time. So that's going to be equal to the function we imported from datefns, which is format distance to now. And then inside this function, all we need to do is pass in the date time string, which is this thing right here. So let me copy that, and we paste it inside this function. So it takes this and it formats it in a way that I want to show it on the screen. So now that's stored inside this time variable. So all I need to do now is return a new object which represents the documents and replace the current created app property with this thing right here. So to do that, I'm going to say ... doc, which is the doc right here as we map through the original array. So we take the document and spread all of the properties on it, including the created at and the ID and the name and the message. And then also I want to say created at, so I'm overriding this particular property. Even though we're outputting it inside the doc anyway, I'm now overriding it here. And then I'm going to set that equal to time, which is the new formatted time right here. Okay, so now we end up with a new array where each object is this thing right here. So it's got all the original properties of the document, the name, the message, and the ID, but we're overriding the created app property on each one to be this formatted time thing right here. So now we can cycle through the formatted documents instead of just documents. And when we're now outputting this thing right here, it's going to look a little nicer. So we need to return formatted documents so we can use it, and then change this to formatted documents. And then right here, we just need doc.createdAt, not to date anymore, because we've already formatted it right here and we've used to date inside this function. So this will just be the formatted date time now. So if I save it and preview over here, that looks a lot better. So 6 hours ago, 11 minutes, 8 minutes, etc. And if I type a new one, then we can see less than a minute. Alright then, so this is all looking pretty good and everything's working, but there is a small problem. Watch this. I've already added in a few extra chats. Now if I add another one, say hi for example, then I don't automatically see that chat right here, and I have to scroll down further in the window to see it. And I don't want that to be the case. I'd like it so that if someone types in a message, the chat window automatically scrolls when we receive it to the bottom so a user can see it. And also the same is true for when we refresh the page or first enter the chat room if we've just logged in. If I do this, then the chat window is going to start at the top with the oldest messages. I'd like it to auto scroll down to the bottom right here. So I'm going to leave this as a challenge for you to try and figure out, so that when a user first enters the page or whenever they enter a new message, the chat room will automatically scroll to the bottom. Now, as a hint, you're going to use two different things. A template ref on the messages div, this thing right here, so you can control the scroll height of it, and also the onUpdated lifecycle hook, which you can use inside the setup function. So I want you to maybe play around with that, try and figure it out, pause it right here and do that. And then if you want to see my solution, then just click play again. Okay then, so the first thing, like I said, I'm going to do is add a ref to this messages div so that we can control its scroll height down in the setup function later. Now I'm going to call this ref messages, but it doesn't matter what it's called. Now down here, I'm going to create this ref. So let me just do a little comment here to say auto-scroll to bottom of messages. And what I'm going to do is create this ref, const messages, set it equal to a ref which is null, but then we return it down here so it can be used inside the template. So now this thing, whenever we use it in the future, is going to reference this DOM element. And this is the thing that's got that scroll applied to it. So what we want to do is scroll it right down to the bottom. But when do we want to do that? Well, we want to do it basically whenever the component updates, because initially this is null, but then it becomes some kind of value, an array of documents, and the component updates. And it's at that point we want to scroll to the bottom as we're outputting those documents. So let's do the onUpdated lifecycle hook, which fires a function every time we get an update to the data, basically. So this function right here, we're going to take our messages.value. So that's this ref right here, which is this DOM element, remember, this thing. So we want that, and we want to get the scroll top value because we're going to set that equal to something. And that's going to be messages.value.scroll height. Okay, so we're setting it equal to the height of whatever the container is, the scroll height. And that means that it's going to scroll right to the bottom. All right, and that's all there is to it. So now every time the data updates, it's going to update the scroll value, the scroll top value, to scroll down to the bottom. So if I try to refresh, then nothing seems to be here. So it's because I've not imported ref. So let me just import that because we use it right here. I'm going to save that again and refresh. And now we can see it loads and it scrolls automatically to the bottom. And now if I type in a new message, we see it and it scrolls automatically to the bottom. Alright, so on the surface, everything looks good here and everything's working correctly, but there is one more small problem, and that's to do with how we're setting up real-time listeners to Firebase. Because without us knowing it, we might be setting up multiple real-time listeners all at once from the same browser to our messages collection, and that's not good. We don't want to have multiple real-time listeners, so it sends back snapshots 5-6 times every time there's one single change. It's not good for performance because we might be updating the data over and over again to the same data, and also when it comes to the cost of Firebase as well, if we go beyond the free tier. So in order to demonstrate this, let me come to the get collection composable. And whenever we receive a new snapshot, I'm going to log something to the console. So console.log, and we'll say snapshot. So now we're going to log this to the console every time we get a snapshot, and we can see initially right here, right? Snapshot. If we refresh, we might see it once or twice. We can see it snapshot right here when we get the data. Now, we also get a snapshot every time I type something in. You can see there was 2 snapshots right there because we get a local snapshot, which is the browser version of the snapshot, but also once the data comes back from Firebase itself. Now, watch this. If I was to log out and then log in again, we'll say Yoshi, if I can spell it, at google.com and test1234 and log in. Now, if I log back out and log in again, it can be the same person, doesn't really matter. Yoshi at google.com and test1234. I'm going to log in. And now, watch this. If I say, hey, look how many snapshots there are right there. Loads of them. And that's because every time we log in and we come to this chat window and we run this function right here, get collection, we're setting up a new snapshot. We're not deleting the old one when we log out, we're setting up a new one, so they're all stacking up on top of each other. And the more times we did that, then the more snapshots we'd get back, the more real-time listeners we're setting up, so that's not great. So we need to be able to combat this, but how do we do that? Well, we are going to use the watch effect function. So we've seen that briefly before. The watch effect function runs every time its dependencies inside the function change. We're going to use it to unsubscribe from this thing right here when the component unmounts, when the chat room or the chat window component unmounts. So let me first of all create this down here. We'll say watch effect. Now inside the watch effect function, we pass another callback function, right? And this is the thing that fires every time there's a change in whatever properties we use inside the function. And it also fires once initially as well. But this thing right here, this function takes in a parameter called onInvalidate. And it gets that automatically, this watch effect function right here. And this onInvalidate function will run when the component that this is being used in unmounts. In our case, it's going to be this thing right here, when this unmounts. And that's going to unmount when we log out, because then we go back to the welcome screen. At that point, this component is no longer on the screen, it unmounts. So when we use this watch effect, this onInvalidate function that we get as an argument inside this function will run when that component unmounts. And it's at this point that we want to unsubscribe from this thing right here, this real-time listener. So all we need to do is unsubscribe from the collection when this watcher is stopped, when the component unmounts. So I'm going to paste that comment in right here, just to remind us what this is. And then we say onInvalidate, like so, which also has a function inside it. And this is the function that fires when the component unmounts. So when we leave the chat room, and it's right here. This is where we need to unsubscribe from this. And we do that by first of all storing the results of this in a constant. So I'm going to say const, and I'm going to call it unsub and set it equal to this thing. Because when we use this method, it returns a function, which when we invoke, unsubscribes from the collection. So all I need to do here is invoke that function and it will unsubscribe. So now, whenever we leave this component, this function right here, onInvalidate, is going to run, and the function inside it will run. And what we're doing is invoking this unsub function, which unsubscribes from a real-time listener. That's the function that's returned whenever we use onSnapshot. Okay? So now we're unsubscribing when we leave the chat room. So we won't stack up multiple different real-time listeners. So let's give this a whirl. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to log out. And in fact, I'm going to refresh right here, the whole thing, and clear this. Now I'm going to log in as mario@google.com, and that needs to be lowercase. So let me redo that, mario@google.com, and then test 1 2 3 4, and we're going to log in, and then I'm going to log out again, and again we'll say mario@google.com and test 1 2 3 4 and log in. And now let's try entering a message. So hey. And notice now we only get the two snapshots, the local one and the one from the server, every time we type in a message. They're not stacking up like they did before. So now this is much better. All right, my friends, so there's one more thing I want to do, and that is to create one final authentication guard or route guard, and this time it's going to protect the welcome screen. But you might be thinking, well, why do you want to protect the welcome screen? Well, I don't want to protect it as such. I just don't want users who are logged in to have to see the welcome screen, because if they're logged in, there's no need for them to see a login or sign up form. So, for instance, if a user is logged in and they come to the website, the root directory right here, the root URL, and pressed enter, then I'd want to redirect them to the chat room because they're logged in. And we'll do that using a route guard. So to do this, let's head to the router index file, and we're going to create it underneath the old auth guard right there. So this time I'm going to call this constant require no auth, because we require them not to be authenticated to see this. If they are authenticated, we'll redirect them to the chat room because there's no reason for them to see this. So inside this function, we're basically going to do the reverse of what we've done right here. So I'm going to copy all of that and I'm just going to paste it in here. So we get the current user, first of all. We don't need this line, and in fact I'm going to get rid of this line inside this auth guard as well. And then this time we don't want to say if they're not logged in, we want to see if they are logged in. And if they are logged in, we want to send them to a different component, and that is going to be the chat room one, which is this component right here. So if they try to get to the home screen, we're going to run this auth guard, and if they're logged in, we'll just say, no, you go straight to the chat room. If they're not, then next means just carry on to the current route. Now remember, we need to accept that as a parameter like we do up here. So we take in to, which is where we're going to, from, where we've come from, and next. So now we need to apply this auth guard to this welcome screen, and that again is going to be using before enter, and it's require no auth. Alright, so let's give this a whirl, and now you can see if I go to just / when I'm logged in, it redirects me directly here, but if I log out, I can see this screen. Cool. And so finally, I just want to test this out in 2 separate browsers. So just imagine these 2 people are on opposite ends of the world and they're using this chat room. So we have here someone logged in as Bowser and someone here logged in as Mario. So I just want to make sure the chat works between both of these 2 people. So down here, I can say, hey Mario, and it's going to update hopefully over here and over here. So click enter, and now we can see update in both windows. And down here we can say, hey dude, and that updates in both windows as well. Awesome. So this all works. And that is the project pretty much complete. But I do want to show you how to build this for production. So we have a bundle of code which we can then deploy to Firebase hosting so we can actually view it on the internet rather than just using localhost. And that's what the next chapter is going to be about.